So, anyways, welcome everyone, and welcome to anyone who is watching this after the program on Thursday the 4th at 7 p.m. But I welcome anyone who's joining us. And tonight we have two of our 2020 Kendeigh Grant recipients, Seunguk and Nicole. So both of them will be talking about the research and how they are the projects that they got funded for. Seunguk is a PhD student in Karina Van Riper's lab, looking into bird and human interactions around Champaign-Urbana. And then also Nicole is a master's student in Dr. Michael Ward's lab, looking into grasslands and birds. So anyways, I will give it off to Seunguk, who is our first presenter for tonight, and save all questions to the end. And if anyone is on here that has, or keep everyone keep your microphones muted and leave all the questions to the end. So anyways, I'll hand it off to Seunguk. Thank you.
Thanks for the great introduction, Colin. And it's very nice to meet everyone. My name is Seunguk, a PhD student at the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences at the University of Illinois. I am pleased to present what I have done with birds and kids over the past year. Let me share the screen real quick. All right. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my talk is entitled "A Bird in the Hand: Impacts of Hands-on Experiences with Birds on Children's Environmentalism," which is based on part of my doctoral dissertation research. And just to give you a sense of who's who in my research team, I myself was the leader of the project. Dr. Henry Pollock is a postdoc in my lab who was the bird expert in this project. And Dr. Karina Van Riper is my academic advisor who advised on my project implementation. And Julia Knaus was an undergrad research assistant in our lab. And Dr. Mark Hauber is a professor and a behavior ecologist who also helped me with the analysis and interpretation of this study. Before I go further into my study, I just wanted to acknowledge upfront and thank the generous support from the Kendeigh Grants for my research. It was the very first external research grant I have ever received, and it has given me a significant credit as a researcher and a lot of courage for my future endeavors in academia. So I would like to thank Champaign County Audubon Society for making such a valuable research experience for me in the past year. So my talk will cover the following contents of this study. Firstly, I will be talking about the background to give you how and why this research was planned. And regarding the methods, I will cover the materials and procedures used in this research. In results, I will highlight what I found in the study and discussion for interpreting the results and concluding the study. And lastly, I will also share some of the lessons I learned conducting this study. So I assume most of you are bird enthusiasts, and let's see if you resonate with these motivations for bird watching found in previous research. So for those who go bird watching away from their homes, they do that to socialize with other birders, achieve skills in birding, or just to enjoy the activity. Another study says that people do backyard birding at their homes to feel pleasure out of concern for birds and to interact with nature. So it sounds like birding is related to conservation behavior because these bird enthusiasts are also likely to be nature enthusiasts as well. But how can such interactions between humans and birds promote conservation exactly? So a conceptual model for this research posits that birds as the biophysical process of nature can evoke psychological and behavioral responses from humans. And this leads to the appreciation of nature's benefits, such as psychological restoration and stress reduction, a sense of place, which in turn lead to care and stewardship for nature, because you want to protect what you appreciate, right? Then this will benefit birds again, so that this cyclical relationship resumes. And I am particularly focusing on this positive experience with wildlife as the basis of human conservation. So the main population of this study is children. As you might agree, there is a growing concern that children these days are spending less and less time outside and more time inside, particularly on screen. For them, interaction with wildlife and animals can be really effective ways to learn about nature and foster environmental values and behavior that are oriented toward wildlife conservation. So how exactly can children benefit from nature experience? One thing would be knowledge of nature. So children experience nature through a variety of multisensory experiences by touching them, feeling them, through auditory and olfactory senses. So they kind of learn what the natural objects are like and how they work. Also, they can grow some sense, psychological feelings of connection to nature by getting contact with nature, and also environmental values that I will explain shortly. So what are values? Human values, especially. So according to the theories on human values, values are defined as the guiding principles of life. In other words, the things that are important in your life. And these values develop during childhood and can change through meaningful experiences. The term significant life experiences in environmental education field refers to the experiences that make long-term impacts on children's environmentalism. So another important concept that I mentioned is connection to nature, or psychological connection to nature, which is basically a psychological bond between humans and nature, as described in the biophilia hypothesis. Connection to nature is considered the basis of care and action for nature, which is essential for conservation efforts. Put together, children's experiences with nature have strong potential to foster connection to nature as well as environmental values, which will theoretically lead to conservation behavior in the long term. So why birds? There are several reasons that make birds an ideal species for environmental and wildlife education. First is their popularity, with about 16.3 million bird watchers in the US. Secondly, birds provide various ecosystem services. And lastly, despite the good understanding of birds, this is still a novel and authentic experience for children, especially we give them a literally hands-on experience. So my research question was how does a hands-on experience how does a hands-on bird program influence children's bird knowledge, connection to birds and nature, and environmental values? My research team went to the Anita Purvis Nature Center at the Urbana Park District in Illinois last summer. There was a nature camp program called Camp Fresh, which stands for Future Responsible Environmental Stewardship Heroes, Fresh, for children of age 11 to 15. And we invited 23 children participating in this camp last summer, and 21 of them agreed to participate from the start to the end. The basic research design was a pre-test and post-test study using a survey to examine the effects of the bird program on children. And if you saw my introductory passage on the website before joining this meeting, you might notice some differences in the methods of this study. This is because there were some complications with the internal research approval process at the university, which made me modify some part of the research plan. I'm still glad that it worked out with the plan B and data collection was successful. So in this program for children, we captured the local birds with mist nets for bird demonstration and bird handling. So if you see the first photo here, there's Colin and Julia carrying all the birds that we caught together early in the morning. And we are like safely carrying them in bird bags to the campsite so that we can demonstrate and kind of play with the birds with children. And in addition, we facilitated mini classes on different topics of bird knowledge, such as bird characteristics and um, um, bill morphology and bird conservation methods. Also, we ran artwork, creating like activities such as drawing me and birds, as you see in the picture, in the third picture, and some of them were really serious about their drawing and created really amazing artwork. In the survey, we included a range of questions to measure children's bird knowledge, a connection to bird, connection to nature, and environmental values. All of these questions were drawn from previous studies, and especially for the connection to bird scale, we adapted the existing connection to nature index by changing all the broader natural terms into bird related terms. And we compared the scores collected before and after the program participation using a Wilcoxon-signed rank test, which is a statistical technique to see if there was a meaningful change between the two scores. So I'd like to show how they reacted to the birds. So we took some slow-mo videos here. Take a close look at their reaction and think about the impacts of these experiences on them. So yeah, all of the children had the opportunities to handle and kind of release the birds. Yeah, under our guidance, and they really liked it, obviously, because it's not a very common experience you can get in your daily life. So in terms of results, first is the demographic information of the participants. The children who participated in this study were about 12 years old on average, and there were eight female children and 7 male children, and 6 children said other for their genders. And racially, the majority of them were white. These are some of the birds that we caught and used for the bird demonstration and other part of the program. Obviously, northern cardinal was one of the most common birds that we caught, although they were really popular among children. And there was gray catbirds and a downy woodpecker, house sparrows, of course, American robins, of course, and American goldfinch, which was also another star for children. So we had a lot of fun with a variety of birds that we caught using the mist net. So like we were really glad that we could provide very diverse experience with birds for the children. So this is just the results from the statistical analysis, which suggested the pre-post comparison indicated that the children's connection to birds and connection to nature significantly improved after participating in the bird program. In other words, their interest in and preferences for birds, as well as their psychological connection to nature, increased. And although their knowledge of birds and environmental values increased too, these changes were not statistically significant. So discussion, based on our observation, we found that the sensory experience with birds can have significant impacts in a relatively short time, which was like a week-long program. Interaction with birds can not only connect children with birds, but also broader nature, which suggests that this like awe inspired by wildlife contact could be a source of the children's environmentalism. Overall, the variables that were scored relatively low, such as connection to birds, benefited more from the program. So as bird knowledge and values of the children were already high at the beginning of the program, they didn't like increase significantly after the program because they were already high. And this also makes sense theoretically because values do not change easily after the critical period, which is between 7 and 11, and most of our children were around 12. So our result could be supported by the value theory as well. Through this project, we could see the potential of interdisciplinary collaboration for environmental programs. For example, our study was informed by knowledge in ecology, psychology, and education, which increased the novelty and engagement of the program. We also learned that several lessons for future applications, such as working with a vulnerable population, such as children, required very serious ethical and safety considerations. So like there were a lot of safety guidelines that we had to take to ensure the safety of this bird program. Also, the mist netting technique we used was quite labor and skill intensive, so resources should be acquired prior to planning this kind of program. Lastly, environmental factors like study site, weather, and bird behavior can affect the success rate of this kind of program because if you can't catch the birds on that day, you have to kind of make up for the lack of the number of birds that you have to demonstrate for the children. Lastly, this study contributes the initial proof of concept findings to environmental and wildlife education research. And for future research, I would suggest that there could be experimental improvement for causality by including a control group, as I also had planned originally, and use of different species other than birds. Of course, other species like reptiles can be used in this kind of program to provide hands-on experiences with children, for children. And longitudinal and qualitative understanding of the experiences of children can be explored to further understand their learning more deeply. So I'd like to thank all my funders again, including Champaign County Audubon Society and the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences, and also my collaborator, the Urbana Park District, and also my lab members, including the lab head, Dr. Karina Van Riper. And yeah, there is this promotional video that we created running this program. So I highly recommend that you take a look at this video. I can put this in the chat so that you can go to the link of the YouTube video. And yeah, that's the end of my talk. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. So thank you very much, Seunguk. I guess we'll just save all the questions to the very end, and we'll go straight into Nicole. But take your time. There's no rush. So
it's okay to share my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Can you all see that all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So hi, just to reintroduce myself, I'm Nicole Suckow. I'm a master's student in Mike Ward's lab at the University of Illinois, and my project is focused on the stopover habitat use and behavior of grassland birds. I first just wanted to thank the Champaign County Audubon Society for supporting my project and inviting me to share with you all today. And thank you for taking an interest in grassland birds. I should start off with a little background on why I'm studying migrating grassland birds. Some of you may already know, or most of you may already know, but grassland birds are the fastest declining suite of birds, primarily due to habitat loss. Since my project is focused on stopover habitat use in Illinois, I'll specify that this habitat loss is largely grassland conversion to agriculture. While it has been established that this has caused drastic declines in grassland bird populations, the responding influx in studies on these species largely focused on habitat use during the breeding season. However, the habitat that grassland birds use during the migratory and wintering periods remain largely unexplored, even though migration can be a really risky and energetically demanding endeavor. So, determining what constitutes high-quality stopover habitat during fall and spring migration is crucial to assure these birds can fuel up and hopefully increase the odds of their survival. So I'm particularly interested in the habitat preferences of these 12 focal species, 11 of which are species in greatest conservation need. These are Henslow's sparrow, Lecompt's sparrow, grasshopper sparrow, field sparrow, eastern meadowlark, dickcissel, bobolink, upland sandpiper, which I apologize, there's no image for, northern harrier, and the common yellowthroat. And my two non-migratory focal species, the northern bobwhite and the ring-necked pheasant, are game species in the Illinois Wildlife Action Plan. For this project, my field technicians and I do a lot of grassland bird surveys throughout Illinois. I'll have a map of my field sites in a later slide, but I survey during spring and fall migration, as well as during the breeding season for comparison. And these are 15-minute, 200-meter transect surveys, where all birds that are seen or heard that could realistically be using the grassland are recorded. This often includes what are known as edge birds that use both shrubby and grassland habitat, like indigo buntings. And we also include flyovers, which is important for species like my focal species, the northern harrier, which I would rarely have them in surveys if I wasn't counting birds that were flying over the grassland, just because they do fly really low looking for prey. They are definitely dependent on grassland, but I would rarely have them actually on the grassland itself. So, excuse me. Using the survey data, we hope to uncover preferences birds might have for different surrounding landscapes, such as grasslands surrounded by ag or surrounded by forest. Likewise, we hope to see if there's a preference for size of grassland. And we also have collected vegetation data at each site in the spring and fall. So we can evaluate any preferences birds might have for types of vegetation, like cool versus warm season grasses, or grass cover versus forb cover. We also measured vegetation density at each transect using a Rowell pole, which is pictured on the right there, where you record the lowest marking you can see from 4 meters away and a vantage point of 1 meter off the ground. And the white PVC frame in the picture is the Davenmeyer frame that we use to sample the composition of different grasslands. So what percent in that frame, for instance, is grass cover, forb cover, litter cover, etc. Another big part of the project, we misnet grassland birds. We collect biometric data like weight, wing length, tail length, as well as muscle and fat scores, which are important for migrating birds. Then for certain species and individuals that are large enough, we attach radio transmitters to track movement and activity patterns. And I should clarify, large enough meaning the combined weight of the transmitter and the harness is less than 5% of the bird's body mass. And the Kendeigh Grant helped fund many of these transmitters. So this is the objective that I will highlight most for today's presentation. But one more interesting aspect that I wanted to mention real quick is that we plan to use DNA metabarcoding of fecal samples collected to look at spring and fall diet differences and preferred forage items among different species. Studies have found that metabarcoding can be used to identify plant and animal matter to show which foods birds are consuming most. So this is a map of my field sites. The yellow pins are survey sites, and the red pins are both survey and telemetry sites where I've collected movement data on radio tagged birds. My survey sites span from a few hectares to a few thousand hectares in size, with different types of vegetation, cover, and density. And so far, we've been able to use automated radio telemetry to track the activity of tagged birds at smaller cemetery prairie, as well as larger pheasant habitat areas. We've also tagged birds at a site surrounded by forest, as well as sites surrounded by ag. So a decent variety of telemetry sites so far. And just to give you an image there, the picture on the right is one of the telemetry towers. So back to misnetting grassland birds. I'm guessing most of you can see the nets in these pictures, at least the top of the nets, the contrast with the sky. Yes. Well, so did the birds. It can be pretty tricky netting in grasslands where you can't disguise nets as easily. And I have been thwarted by these birds on occasion, especially like this little Henslow's sparrow that, they'll get closer and closer to the net until hightailing it back all the way across the field. So certain tactics like using playback, which the recordings of target species vocalizations as a lure, or using particular net arrangements work better for some species than others. Initially, passive netting along fixed transects where I do surveys was used to see if it would also yield a representative sample, but I was not catching any birds that way, so shifted to targeting various focal species, which has been much more effective. Using different approaches to catch different species, we've managed to tag several focal species with radio transmitters using a breakaway leg loop harness. The arrow in the photo is just pointing to a piece of cotton string connecting the elastic of the harness, with the idea being that the cotton thread will degrade quicker, so the transmitter will fall off. The battery life of the transmitter is only a couple weeks, and we're only gathering data from it while it's at the stopover site. So it's really not necessary to fit the bird with a longer lasting or permanent harness. This is the current tally of transmitters deployed, though I am aiming to get about 7 more transmitters out in the next couple of days. I really have been waiting for those bobolinks to come in this season. But since last spring, I've tagged 16 savanna sparrows, and while those aren't a focal species, they do pass through earlier in the spring, and I was aiming to deploy tags preceding prescribed burns. A quick aside, prescribed burns are used to clear litter and return nutrients into the ground, into the soil, as well as tamp down the growth of shrubbier plants that don't fare as well in comparison to native grasses, native forbs, which rebound much better after fires because of their deep roots. Anyway, The goal is to see how these birds respond to that land management, whether they leave the site for good or if they just move to another area for some time. But since it's dependent on strict weather conditions and takes place early in spring migration when there's fewer migrant species around, obtaining this data has proven especially challenging. However, the next most transmitted species is the bobolink, and while I've not been able to go through the telemetry data yet, since I am still very focused on fieldwork and data collection at the moment, I am personally very excited to look at the bobolink data and the third most tagged species, the LeConte sparrow. But for now, I will just give you an idea of what we'll be looking for and some interesting anecdotes from what we've seen so far. Starting with the LeConte sparrow. This is a LeConte sparrow that I tagged at Herschel Workman pheasant habitat area last fall. You can actually see the antenna from this one's transmitter in the picture there. I don't know if you'd be able to see my cursor, but right there, just above my hand. We actually got really good departure data from this individual with a minimum stopover duration of about 14 days. It's minimum stopover duration because we don't know how long the sparrow might have been at this site before we tagged it. But we also had it heading southwest in the early evening, November 11th. What's especially interesting, and I have to credit Mike Ward for this figure, by the way. Again, I've not gotten to dive into the telemetry data yet, but he found that this individual, as well as a few others, show sudden spikes in nighttime activity, which you can compare to the more subtle shift when it was moving to a new roosting site nearby, as indicated by the green arrow there. But we're interested in looking at what elements might impact this kind of nocturnal activity. Other information that we're hoping to take away from the telemetry data is minimum stopover duration, as I'd mentioned, differences in spring and fall activity patterns. The bobolinks, for instance, the figure on the right shows bobolink detections at various sites, which are categorized in this figure by size on the x-axis there. But as you can see, bobolinks were detected much more often in the fall, represented by the orange bars, than they were in spring surveys, which are represented by blue bars. This is unlike other species that I've done preliminary analyses for. Eastern meadowlarks, dickcissels, and Henslow sparrows had more detections in the spring than they did in the fall. So it'll be interesting to compare bobolink survey and telemetry data because just anecdotally, the bobolinks tagged last spring appeared to have very short stopover durations. And then lastly, as I had mentioned earlier, I have had some difficulty with having birds tagged immediately preceding management so far, but if I can tag more before any prescribed burns next fall, the response to management would definitely be something I really hope I can look at. Finally, I would like to acknowledge my graduate committee, the site supers and landowners granting me permission to carry out research at all of my field sites, and my funding sources, especially Champaign County Audubon Society. And I want to thank you again for inviting me to share about my project. And yeah, leave to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. And we'll just go ahead and open it up to questions.
By the way, I will be putting the link to my video in the chat.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'll save that too. I'll put a link to that whenever I upload the video on the YouTube. I'll put that link, like comment that link under our video. So
Yeah, that'll be helpful. Thanks.
Seunguk, one of the things that I noticed when for that brief period of time that I was there when the kids were releasing their birds is, and it showed in the video that you had, just that sheer look of joy on their faces. And I remember some of the kids named their birds and were cheering for them as they went out back into the world. I don't know if there's a way that you can capture that in a study, but I think that really struck me, that they really were moved by that experience. It's not a
Yeah.
question, it's just my impression.
Yeah, thanks. That's what I wanted to see in the program as well. And I do believe that there is a significant impact because children are so honest, crystal clear about their emotions and learning, realization about the world and stuff. And just like, even for me, this bird program was very novel. And for me, it was like very exciting. It's very unique. Really, no program, hardly any program provides that kind of experience. And yeah, I wish that, well, as I suggested at the end of my presentation, there will be some ways to highlight the children's reactions to the bird experience using some kind of qualitative research methods. So by interviewing interviewing the children to discuss their experience, or like by showing them their own videos doing that activity, and kind of soliciting responses to that by reflecting on their own experiences. Those kind of research approaches can be taken. I think it's definitely one of my future research directions.
You mentioned in when you're talking about the formation of values that happens like sometime between 7 and 11 age group. I think that's what you said. Have you thought about doing something or recommending that somebody do something like that with younger children?
Yeah, actually, we did run the same bird program with younger children at
Okay.
the nature center that summer. But like as I mentioned, there was some like complication with the IRB process, which was the internal like review board at the university that like tries to make sure the ethical standards of the research. And because of the timing of the camp and the timing of the review process of the study like didn't like work out very well, I could not include or like share the results from the study with the younger children. But to your point, I did see some like significant changes in their values among younger children. So that was even more encouraging to see, um, and very supportive of the theory that we like children develop their values when they're younger, between 7 and 11, and then they kind of solidify after that age. And when we engaged with like children around their like 12 or 13, they didn't like really change even after such a significant experience.
Okay.
It reminded me of when I was a kid. I was about 10 years old when there was a great horned owl in the backyard, and I think that's what got me hooked. I didn't get to hold him, but I've been involved with birds ever since.
Yeah, those kind of experiences last long in your memories, right?
Right.
Nicole, a question for you. You had a broad range of species there, so maybe it's hard to generalize, but did you find that there were there were certain habitats that were better as stopover places than others?
We haven't done the analyses yet. I haven't looked at components separately, vegetation, size, etc. But just anecdotally, I do notice a difference in what species you'll find at different types of sites. Some species have like a minimum site size that they prefer. They might still be found at a range of grassland sizes, but not below a certain size. Like a lot of the beautiful cemetery prairies that I survey, you won't find, you know, bobolinks or meadowlarks necessarily if they don't stop over at sites that are that small.
Okay.
I was curious about the timing of your studies between how it relates to when there are experimental burns on these sites.
Yes, so
Before or after?
surveys are done before and after. I was trying to net immediately before burns to get the bird's response via telemetry data, but surveys are done both. Surveys are kind of nonstop, so I can get, you know, what birds are around before the burn and what birds are around after. I have that as a little management column. I've noted when burns have occurred at each site. So yes, I'll have both.
You might be interested, Nicole. We just finished looking at the applicants for this year's Kendeigh grants, and somebody is doing a study on the effects of burns on grassland species nesting. So that's kind of a nice dovetail there.
Oh yeah, wonderful. Are they looking at a range of species as well, or do they have a few in mind?
Yeah, they were looking at a range of species, and interestingly, they were also looking at the predation of those birds by two different species of snake, and what effect the burns had on the snake, and then what effect that had on the nesting of the birds. So it's a lot of variables to juggle there. So I'm kind of interested in where they're going to go with that.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I was pleased that you did not net a harrier. I think that would have been kind of a challenge to remove from the net. So
I think so too. Yeah, I get a little panicked every time they fly low over my nets.
So Seunguk, do you have any plans for follow-up on this, or anything more that you're going to do with this project at this point?
Yeah, thanks for asking about the follow-up plan. I did have the plan to do a follow-up survey with the kids who participated in the camp and the bird program. And I actually launched the follow-up survey 4 months after the nature camp. And due to a very low response rate, I could not really collect a meaningful amount of data. They were kind of detached from the nature camp and the bird program we ran during the summer after some amount of time. So I couldn't do that. But like if I were to replicate this study somewhere else in a different like region or context, I would definitely make that clear to the participants so that they can like more aware of the following follow-up surveys and these kind of, you know, continuing efforts to monitor the longitudinal efforts of the program, because I don't want it to be just one-time thing, and I want it to have a long-lasting impact on people, and I believe it does have that kind of power. So yeah, in my future like research efforts, I would definitely consider increasing, like enlarging the scale of the study, as well as making sure that the follow-up surveys can be implemented well.
And Nicole, what do you see as a follow-up? Well, of course, you're in the process of doing analysis at this point.
I'm still in the field next fall, but I will be doing more of a deep dive into analyses soon then. But yeah, I still have one more field season. Well, I guess I'm in the field this summer too, but I have one more fall field season still ahead.
It was interesting that you found a number of those species much more in the fall than you did in the spring. Do you think that's fairly typical, or?
So far I've only looked at preliminary results for those 4 species, but for the bobolinks, that I am interested to see if it's the same pattern this fall. But I do think it seems like maybe they're just in such a hurry to get to their breeding grounds. But yeah, I saw them a lot longer. They stuck around last fall, but in the spring, and I mean, I still haven't seen them at my telemetry sites this spring. But yeah, it was very quick last year that they passed through.
How far further north do they nest, bobolinks?
I think actually my northernmost sites are at like the southernmost of their breeding range. So my northern sites like Goose Lake Prairie and Des Plaines Fish and Wildlife are like right at the southern bit of their breeding range, and north of there.
So Beth, your question was how far north do they nest?
Well, yeah, and just how far south as well as how far north.
Yeah.
Yeah, they go. Or go ahead,
Sorry, go
Nicole.
ahead.
No.
No, you go ahead, Colin.
No, so I think they go up to southern Canada. I was just going to say that it'll be interesting whenever you do officially analyze all the data for 2 years. I'm assuming it's just because the birds have so low stopover rates in the spring because they're trying to get up to the breeding grounds versus the fall, where they have a more generalized approach to migrating. They kind of just mosey around and do whatever, versus in the spring they shoot straight up. And especially this year, everything will have probably even shorter stopover rates because of the weather, because we're obviously a little behind.
Yeah.
A lot of birds going through the next 4 or 5 days. They've even had bobolinks nesting as far south. I mean, the general range for eastern Illinois, yes, is Goose Lake Prairie, and that area is the furthest south that they go. They actually have had them nesting on my organic farm properties around Gibson City and Paxton in the summer. So, but there's like 2 or 3 pairs. It's not like anything significant. But anyway, that's really cool. But yeah, I would assume it's just because it's low stopover rates. It'd be interesting to see all that whenever you get it all analyzed for 2 years.
Yeah, thank you.
Be very cool. Any other questions? Thankfully, I see both Seunguk and Nicole very often, so I know both of their projects very well. So that's why I don't have any further questions at the moment. But if anyone else does, I go right ahead.
I appreciate the presentation and the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you for coming.
Just one statement. One of the things I think that impressed us about both of your projects, and something I think we increasingly are looking for, is what kind of impact might your project have on conservation. And it was obvious with both of you, and that was, you were at the top of our list, and we were very, I'm impressed again, but we were very impressed with what you proposed to do and what you have done. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the encouragement.
All right. Well, thank you, Roger, for saying that. I guess we'll just go ahead and end this meeting for tonight. And this will be posted on YouTube. I'll probably do it either tonight or probably tomorrow, sometime in the next 24 hours. I can send both of you links to that so you can share it or whoever, or do whatever with the YouTube so you guys can have it as a video presentation. And I guess that'll be it for now. So we have a lot of events coming up since this will be recorded. We have a lot of events coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So visit our website for all the details on all those. But anyways, thank you again to both of you. And unless there's any last minute questions, but thank you both of you guys for presenting and have a great night.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having us.
You
Thank you
bet.
very much.
Thanks for coming.